Hi, welcome to today's Sheep Connect webinar on bushfire recovery, producer experiences with Mark Modra from Greenpatch on Eyre Peninsula. I'm Jodie Rizet O'Brien and I'm one of the Sheep Connect coordinators. Sheep Connect is supported by Australian Wool Innovation, the South Australian Sheep Industry Fund and Primary Industries and Region South Australia. We also acknowledge the support from the South Australian Murray-Darling Basin and Adelaide and Mount Lofty Ranges Natural Resources Management Boards through funding from the Australian Government's National Land Care Program and the NRM levies. If you want more information on Sheep Connect, you can go to our website, sheepconnectsa.com.au, or you can follow us on Twitter. So I'd like to introduce Mark Modra, and Mark experienced the Wongaree fires in 2005. Mark, if you can tell us a bit about your farm business and the Wongaree fires. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jodie. Thank you very much. Yes, we were impacted by the Wongaree fires. Unfortunately, we at that stage were cropping or farming, should I say, about 1,600 hectares, and for predominantly cropping with some livestock as well. We had about 900,000 sheep plus lambs. So we weren't a big stock enterprise, but we were moving that direction. Our properties were spread from just out of Port Lincoln up to Lily, and we were impacted. Three of those farms were impacted, and we were lost, probably about half of our ground to, a bit over half actually, of our farms to fire damage. We're predominantly cropping, continuous cropping really, and running a few sheep on those paddocks that we were often too wet or too weedy to crop, and we had retaining stubbles, controlled traffic, and all that sort of thing. Our soil types were predominantly sand over gravels over clay, so very similar to KI type soils, acidic rolling hills, and some areas of deep white sand. So very similar to KI, except we didn't have the rainfall. We're about 18 to 20 inch rainfall, 450 to 500 mils rainfall. Now, the fires came through and everything happened very quickly, as all fires do. We had an FDI of 320, which was the highest reading that they had since Ash Wednesday. It was similar to Ash Wednesday, according to their data. And it went through in one quick afternoon and took everything out. I was fortunate to have support and help to help look after properties, because I would try and protect one, and as the fire front went through the next one, I would try and protect that one as well. It was chaos from a CFS perspective. Comms were down, so people weren't sure what was happening and where things were going, and that's fairly standard with most of the larger fires. CFS had trouble keeping up with forward movement of fires. We lost about 50 kilometres of fencing, numerous buildings, houses got scorched, but we didn't lose any dwellings, thankfully. 2 shearing sheds and a bit of farm machinery. For me, probably the biggest concern and loss was soil. I was really concerned about soil erosion, either wind erosion because their soils are fairly light, and also the potential at that stage of water erosion because we've got no ground cover.
So, Mark, immediately after the fire, what sort of activities did you do, and what were your next steps following the fire for your farm?
Straight after the fire, livestock were the biggest issue. We had sheep that were burnt. When the fire went through, I was trying to shift sheep onto paddocks that had very little stubble, and that didn't seem to make any difference. The fire was that intense that all the sheep got some sort of impact. And so that was the job the next day, and that wasn't much fun, putting down sheep that weren't going to survive, and then picking up the ones that had obviously perished. Thankfully, I had some good help from neighbours and friends, including Mark Bowden, who is actually from KI. He's been burnt out in this last lot, so he was good help for us too. in regards to the sheep, we weren't sure what to kill and what not to kill. And so we had very little help or understanding at that stage. So anything that we thought was singed, particularly around the feet, we put down. And then the rest we shifted on to some other paddocks that had good stubble and were soft. When I say soft, sandy, so we didn't want to impact the sheep's feet at that stage. And then we lost another probably 20% of those that were left. And that was mainly due to smoke inhalation or pneumonia or something like that, because those sheep looked pretty good and they, responded well, but they went downhill quickly after the fire. So we probably should have culled a few more or done something in that respect. So we retained about 100 sheep out of 1,000. The rest we dug, put down and carried and put into pits, and that wasn't much fun, as many people would have experienced that would, understand. But yeah, we had help with heavy machinery, excavators and so forth, digging pits and so forth. Some of those sheep actually had to be shifted because some of the holes were too close to so-called creeks and watercourses. So that was lots of fun trying to do it the second time.
The lessons learned.
After that, we had some exposed. Sorry, go.
I was going to say lots of lessons learned there,
yes,
Mark.
Yes.
And I might just say we've just done a webinar with Dr. Jeremy Rogers, who's one of the veterinarians with PIRSA, on that immediate aftercare of animals following a bushfire. So if you're interested in some of that information, jump on one of our other webinars about that livestock health. So perfect. Thanks, Mark. Sorry to interrupt you.
We did also have some exposed water pipes. And obviously they'd been burnt, and we had to replace those to get water to the house and so forth. But a lot of our mains water was out. The still mains pipes that you get that run on the ground had actually buckled and telescoped inside each other because of the heat, and there were numerous breaks. I think there was, many places where those pipes were broken. So it took SA Water quite a few days. I think it was, it might have been 2 weeks or so before they got that water back on. But they worked very hard. They realised the potential of not having water to Port Lincoln, and that's where the Lincoln's water was coming through. From then, we had the opportunity to sit back and reassess the situation. So where are we at now? What are our priorities? Where are we at finance-wise? Where are we at equipment-wise? And ability to get supplies, because there were many hundreds of people that have been burnt out, and trying to get fencing supplies was going to be difficult. And not only that, trying to get post-hole diggers, for ourselves, machinery that wasn't burnt, or getting contractors in was going to be difficult. So we undertook a program. We sat back actually and said, well, what's the priority here? And we said, well, we want to get a boundary in. And in some places that wasn't such a priority either, because we had very few sheep. And I would suggest that if you're in the situation where you don't have sheep, while it's a loss, it is also a blessing. It takes the pressure off that you don't have to get fences up straight away, and gives you a chance to digest the situation. And you might want even to do things like go cropping or continuous cropping if you've got the plant, or neighbours that have the plant to be able to help you in that respect. Because the problem is there's so much to do. There's buildings to do, fences, water troughs, water lines, raceways, the list goes on, and you can easily get overwhelmed by the task in front of you. And I think to try and think that needs to be done in 12, 18 months, accomplish all that, is perhaps a bit foolish and just put yourself under too much pressure. And so I think it's a matter of saying, well, I'm going to prioritise this job, this, whatever it may be, and focus on those, and just doing in bite-sized chunks. Don't get too overwhelmed by the whole progress or the whole situation.
So, Mark, how did you prioritise what needed to be done?
For me, I just looked at trying to keep the farm going. What was the most important thing? I need to try and create an income for next year. So for me, cropping was the focus. I could live without sheep. And so I looked at trying to prepare myself for the next season. So getting my soils in condition, looking at seed and looking at what crops I should be growing. Because there was no cover, I threw lupins out the window because they weren't going to hold the soil very well. I threw canola largely out the window for that same reason, because of potential drift on emergence. So it was really a cereal-based program. And so I needed to get seed, and I think I got some seed from some of the neighbours who are outside the fire area to ramp up my cereal production. And I also tried to look after my soil. And so whether I had deep sands, I was able to get a clay making, and that's a machine that actually digs up clay, subsoil clay, and spreads it on top. And I was spreading it about 70 to 100 tonnes per hectare. And that did a fantastic job at reducing or stopping India wind erosion. And those white sands are the most vulnerable to wind erosion, and that was absolutely fantastic. So we had probably got 30, 40 hectares done like that, and we didn't touch that until seeding time. So the sand, clay cover on top stayed there, and that worked really well. On our other soils, I undertook some ripping, deep ripping, and that was just to bring up large aggregates of soil. When I say large aggregates, probably around fist size or larger, to try and trap any sand that was moving. And I did probably more than I should have, because there are some areas that didn't have the large aggregates come up. I was fortunate to have some help, and I sat a gentleman on the tractor. These rips are about 1 metre apart at right angles to the prevailing winds, and it was a little bit hard to guide and show him where he should go, and so more probably got done than was necessary. And when I say it was necessary, some places I didn't bring up any big clods, and so that was really a wasted effort. But where it did bring up the big clods, it actually stopped the drift moving across the paddock. And so we had drift coming across the road from our neighbours, drifted across the road. The grader would have to go out there and, shovel the stuff off the road. It would come across in our paddock, and so we would collect and retain that soil. So it was really good. We sort of picked up a bit more topsoil. The other side of that was we picked up a few weed seeds as well. So we ended up picking up some radish and some other nasty weeds that took us, 10 years to get rid of with a fair bit of diligence. So that would be something to watch out for if you've got neighbours that have weeds that you don't, and the prevailing wind side, you might have issues there that worth looking at. Nevertheless to say, I think I shared some of our topsoil with the neighbours too. Now, the break of the season for us was we were waiting and watching for rain all the time, just to get some green up, to get anything up. And our plan was just to get something up to hold the topsoil. And unfortunately for us, we had very little summer rain. I think we had about 20 points from the fire from January through to the break of the season. We had a late break, which was in June, middle of June that year. And it was an unusually hot summer. And we ended up having fire bans into May, which is quite unusual for us. Anyway, the rain came in the middle of June, and when it started, it didn't stop. We had about 3 to 4 inches of rain, close to 100 mils, up to 100 mils of rain in a short period of time, and it turned our parched landscape into a quagmire. It was a mess. We had gutters and waterlogging, and got bogged numerous times. And yeah, I got to see what the landscape was like without stubble, and it really take it for granted how much stubble holds their soils. As part of my preparation, I put up some dam banks, or little wash banks, I used to call them, and they were banks about a metre high, sometimes 1.5 metres, just depending what they were. And it was really in place where we had contour banks, which we had removed, and these were what I call high pressure points on the side of hills and gullies where water would tend to wash, and they had poly pipe in the bottom of them. So they would actually let the water flow through, but would stem any major wash or any large rainfall event. And in some places they worked really well. Other places where the rainfall amount was so high, they would silt up and just washed over. So I think the system was good, though in some places it wasn't enough. Other places, was fully covered, just depending on where the rain fell and how much it was. And some of those banks are still here to this day. Some I filled in after that 1 year just to get us out of trouble. Now, from a sheep perspective, we sold most of our sheep on. I just didn't want the hassle of that, and we waited till we had fences in place before we carried on too much more stock. And that just made life easier. It just wasn't so complex because having to feed sheep on bare ground and or on other paddocks were going to be problematic. And I would encourage anyone who's looking at running stock on those fire areas, or if they've got half-burnt paddocks, to actually fence off those the burnt areas so the sheep don't travel those areas, because they will just churn it up and make it drift.
Mark, is there any advice, and lessons learned that you have from Wangari that you would share with the producers that have just experienced fire? So is there anything you do differently, or is there some take-home messages you might have for those guys?
A few things there. Certainly, my advice is once you get burnt, take your time. Don't rush back into things. And if you're not sure on things, do what you do know. For example, fence your boundaries, and then look at your farm map and look into the future. What would you like? The fire's given us a whole fresh slate to deal with. Often when you're in a farm situation, you're going, I don't need to shift that fence. That's too close to this other one, and so you don't tend to do things as you would like to. But with a fire like this, it gives us a brand new start, and it gives us an opportunity to set things out how we would like them. And so things I would take into consideration would be topography, areas that are going to wash. We tend to fence our paddocks on the contour so that you would work your ground on the contour if you're cropping. Laneways, obviously, creeks, soil types, switching to soil types. The beauty about this fire is it's great to be able to start afresh, and it gives you the ability to use your imagination a bit, perhaps to talk to neighbours or talk to people who know about farming systems in general, PIRSA or some webinars in regards to some bigger picture stuff. Also, I think it's good to take a step away from the farm, because often, particularly if you have a late break, you live in that environment all the time. Dust blowing, getting inside the house, and the windows are taped up, and dust coming in all the time, and you look out the kitchen window and it's just bleak. I think it's good to get outside of the area, go and have a break, or go and visit some friends, or a holiday or something like that, where you can recharge your batteries and get a perspective on life, and say, well, hang on, while things are pretty shitty, we are really quite fortunate in the bigger scheme of things. And I think that's really important, because often we sort of get caught into the situation of you wake up to every day and all the dust, and you can't get rid of it, it's everywhere, and you can be quite negative about things. And it also helps in regards to your worldview. If your farm is all that you've got, then and it gets burnt, then your life is shattered. But if you've got a worldview outside of that, a spirituality, whatever you believe in, that certainly helps you in that context. It certainly helped me, having a faith and believing that, there's bigger picture stuff in the family and the community and everything else. And certainly something I've taken away from the experience is certainly the help that I've had from the wider community. I was fortunate to have some help, not just from that, but I was to head overseas shortly after the fires on a scholarship, and I had a lot of help from those people that were participating in that, and they came and helped me out as I was wondering whether I should go. And that was really helpful for me to be able to receive that support, and it takes a bit of humility to do that at times, but then to be able to get away and to look at looked at other things, and that, you know, it's not the end of the world, you know, when these things happen.
It's been great to hear, you know, what you did and how you recovered from that. And I'm assuming you're back at full production now after the fire of 2005.
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, production's pretty well back up where it was. You know, we're benefiting from a different fenced landscape, and we're a more efficient farming system because of it. And we've learnt some things from the fire. You know, the deep gripping and, you know, some of the tactics I use in regards to erosion control have been good, and I utilise those now. So yes, we're very much on top of things. The other thing about the fires is they've been fantastic for regenerating the scrub areas that we've previously had. So if you've got areas that you fenced off, would like to fence off, do it now and keep the sheep out, because sheep will be the ones that really knock around any regrowth. And if you're doing refencing, we found that it pays to go along your fence lines before you refence, and any trees, large trees that are near the fence lines, either lean them the other way or push them over so that they don't fall on the fence. We went along our fence lines, and we were thankful we did that. And some of our neighbours, unfortunately, didn't have the machinery to do so, and they ended up, you know, 3 or 4 years after the fire, a lot of these dead limbs falling down and, you know, not destroying, but certainly damaging their brand new fences. And so, yeah, when it comes to re-veg stuff, you'll be surprised at what comes back. We had areas that were plants that were considered endangered, and they were looking at fencing off these areas and keeping them separate because, you know, these species that hadn't been seen for a long time were coming back. And then after about 4 or 5 months, these plants were coming up everywhere. So fire stimulated a lot of this regrowth, and that was fantastic. So it did cause some issues on our roadsides in regards to stimulating extra growth there. So we had some issues there, and still have some issues in regards to visibility and trees out on traffic side of things.
Thanks, Mark, for sharing your experiences with us. And I'd like to thank the funders and supporters of Sheep Connect that made today's webinar possible. Thank you.